California and Texas are a tale of two states when it comes to the Biden-Bernie primary matchup. Polling is, of course, super interesting, and our panel is poised to talk all about it.
So joining us today, Stephen Cobb, former Obama administration appointee, former deputy AG of Virginia, and Kelsey Bolar, senior news producer at the Daily Signal and visiting fellow with the Independent Women's Forum. Two great friends of the show. And Kelsey, we're so glad to see you again.
Yeah,
great to be back.
Great to have you back.
Yeah. All right, so we got these fascinating new polls out of California and Texas. The reason we want to highlight these, not just Super Tuesday, but they tell a very, very different story. So let's throw California up on the screen there. I mean, you've got a margin of error, 5.2%, virtual tie between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. But if we throw Texas up on the screen, we see that Joe Biden has got 35%, and Bernie at 15, Elizabeth Warren at 13. Stephen, this is very much a tale of the South versus the West and the coasts, right? Like the coasts, there seems to be not as much affection, so to speak, for Joe Biden and a little bit more willingness to entertain the progressivism. Whereas down in the South, Biden just seems to have this rock-solid lead, not just amongst African Americans, but amongst the Southern population writ large. What do you think?
Well, I think California, remember one of the things we looked at last week, we looked at the polls, we saw big swings, some people going up 6, down 6, and each way. So I think the takeaway continues to be in California that it's really anyone's game. And it's statistically not just the top 2, it's the top 3 there, all within the margin of error of each other. And so it's really going to be, and I think you've seen that kind of up and down going with the swings of popularity on kind of the national scale. And California has seemed to sort of mirror that.
Right.
Texas is a little bit different, obviously. There used to be, that was Beto's hook, and then he said, I can do the best here. But I think that you're seeing particularly with the former vice president, has the roots in the infrastructure there and the history with those Democrats, and it clearly shines through in that poll.
That's just what it is.
What do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah.
Well, first off, I have to point out that it's ironic that there are 2 old white men leading the Democrat primary thus far.
Yeah.
It certainly is a tale of 2 states. What I'm more curious about is the enthusiasm surrounding either of these candidates. Bernie Sanders, I would say, has enthusiasm when it comes to his young supporters.
Totally.
Biden, not so much. I think he's just kind of the backup, the safe bet that Democrats care so much about defeating Trump that they're willing to support him if they think that he's their best option. But the more and more gaffes we hear coming from Biden, I think the less and less excited people become about him.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't hurt him in the polls. I mean, the recent polls have showed him going up.
He's going up. It's
but to your point, Kelsey, if we look at the CNN poll and dig down into, who people trust on the different issues, Bernie Sanders number 1 on healthcare, number 1 on climate crisis, number 1 on gun policy, number 2 on the economy, and number 2 on immigration, narrowly behind Biden on those 2. But the top 2 issues of the Democratic primary electorate, healthcare and the climate crisis, Bernie Sanders is number 1. So I think Kelsey's exactly right to say the thing that is holding him back is this perception, which I think is wrong, but we can argue about that another time. But this perception that Joe Biden is the one you got to go with, you got to suck it up, basically, as Joe Biden essentially said, and vote for Joe, even if you like Bernie better on the issues.
Yes, but usually the number 1 issue for Democratic primary voters is winning in November of 2020. And so with that being the number 1 issue.
How's that been working out for them?
You see that.
How did that work out with them for Hillary Clinton and Al Gore and John Kerry?
And enthusiasm is very important on this
part of it. I saw a video yesterday, but this is purely anecdotal, obviously, but it was burnt. I mean, I watched a lot of these campaign videos, and I see Biden, in these rooms, and there's just like not a lot of movement. I mean, I saw this video of Bernie literally along a line of thousands of college students, and it was like watching a rock star.
Yeah,
like, actually,
go crazy for him.
I love you. And I was like, wow, man, like you got to calm down.
Well, we saw that poll. We covered it yesterday that had a national poll. 52% among voters under 35, and Biden at 11. Pete, by the way, at 2.
Yeah, I think the only thing that matters to me right now is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and who has the highest numbers there across the board. And right now, that's Joe Biden.
That's true.
And he beats every other candidate every day of the week.
Yeah, and but it's interesting though. I'm looking at this thing, and I still see Elizabeth Warren in 3rd place in both. And I just think that healthcare, I mean, it just totally collapsed her candidacy, and
she had been leading in California.
She was leading in California. She was tied in California. She was leading in Iowa. She was leading in New Hampshire. She was breaking through nationally, and then just fell right back to third, Stephen, I mean, so much of it is just that she seemed to have that theory and the plans, and a lot of that was just shattered with her Medicare for All transition plan.
I think some of this is cyclical, though, too. Right?
Yeah.
So you see a bunch of these campaigns going up and down, and who's the new, leader or fresh face? Yeah,
Right.
flavor of the month. Whether that's Elizabeth Warren or whether that's Pete Buttigieg, whether that's Andrew Yang coming out of some of his debate performances.
6% in California.
I knew you would point it out. But
He's always there. He's just lurking.
Right, but I think it's still early to write off any of these folks as saying that collapse. I think some of these are riding the wave of kind of voter interest, and there's still plenty of time for them to get that next win, those next momentum behind them going into the caucus.
I mean, the thing that we've talked about a lot here is basically those flavors of the month is all about the white, affluent liberal support. They're the ones that are shifting around. They're the ones that are undecided. The young folks and the working class folks are consolidated behind Sanders. You've got older folks and working class folks consolidated behind Biden, and then you have this sort of affluent white group that is looking for their savior. It was Kamala, it was Beto, it was Pete, it was Warren, it's back to Pete again. And so that's where most of the movement comes in. But if you're just looking at the top of the polls, Bernie and Biden have been very, very steady.
What do you think, Kelsey? Yeah.
I'm not writing any of the candidates off yet. Specifically, Warren and Buttigieg, I'm very interested to watch in the long run. I mean, Buttigieg does not have a big record to run on, so I'm curious to see if he can sustain his candidacy. But
It's got to be
honest,
at more than 1%.
to be honest, as a conservative, these policies couldn't be further from my own personal values and the values in the Republican Party. And so I'm encouraged by the state of the Democrat race for conservatives and for the Trump administration, that they're, despite the personalities involved, there are just so stark. There's such a stark difference between the policies that we're hearing coming from both sides right now that hopefully voters will have a very clear decision to make next year.
And I think you're right. And one of the main reasons is if you go with Joe Biden, that just is so much a 2016 redux on the.
God.
It really is. I mean, it will just be very much
same exact campaign
on Trump is an aberration, character. The last 20 years, 30 years were actually great, and this is the 4 years,
right?
Which isn't. I mean,
and then slamming Biden for corruption, potential health issues.
It will be. I think it'll be exactly the same as 2016, Stephen.
I think that there is some analysis there that a lot of people are having second thoughts about who they voted for, whether that was for President Trump or whether that was for one of these third-party candidates. And I think when you go out there and you engage with voters, they, in part, would say, if you could do over your 2016 vote, would you? And I think people are seeing high margins of yes. And so I'm not saying that I agree with your analysis.
Honestly, on the right, I think if anything, support has much more consolidated around President Trump.
Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those are where the numbers are.
Wisconsin, Trump is up by what, like 10 points in the last poll that we looked at? And on impeachment, people don't think so.
Impeachment's a huge liability.
But when you look at how Democratic turnout and Democratic elections in those three states have gone throughout the off year and the midterm, Democrats have been picking up in each of those states. Enthusiasm is there, and something to look for in 2020.
We'll see, Stephen.
All
right, sit tight, everybody. We're going to have more Rising right after this quick break.